Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, this is The Metro. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, the holiday season is now in full swing, and that has us wondering, what's your holiday tradition?
What do you like most and least about the holidays? We'll open up the phone lines to hear from you.
The number is 313-577-1019. And we'll also talk about ways to survive the holiday season from a mental health perspective.
And Detroit has issued a number of tax incentives in recent years. How exactly do they work, and why does the city rely on them? We'll break it down.
Plus, we'll tell you everything you need to know about a long-time holiday tradition in the city happening this weekend. But first, what does food mean to you? For many, food is more than something to excite your taste buds. It's a container for culinary traditions, helping continue the heritage of the people who created it. That is, food is used to nourish, preserve, and to tell stories. A new documentary, Detroit, the City of Chefs, sets the table. In the film, chef, producer, and award-winning director Keith Famie highlights what makes Detroit's food scene so rich, and what food can do to continue old rituals and inspire new stories. His film premieres December 9th at the Imagine Theater in Novi and is on PBS on December 12th at 9 p.m. To discuss it now, we have Keith Famie here. Keith, welcome to the Metro.
Oh, thank you for letting me spend a little time talking about food.
Oh, of course.
And our rich culinary history.
Yes, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. But you've seen and experienced culinary scenes from across the globe, and you've worked as a chef here as well. So what makes Detroit's culinary scene unique?
You know, I wanted to tell this this story for almost 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I grew up in the restaurant industry. I was a chef. You know, I was fortunate to have worked for some of the early European chefs that really kind of created our evolution of who we are as diners here through the foods that they brought from different countries, their homelands. So I always wanted to tell this story, and I felt the story is important because of the rich background behind our ethnic cultures and food. You know, Detroit is at one time was one of the wealthiest cities in the country, and by far one of the most diverse communities. And there's a lot to be celebrated with that, not just through art and music, but how we eat, what we eat, and the foods that come from different countries. And that is who we are as Detroiters, and that's who we are as the Motor City. And in our chef community, most of chefs from different countries brought with them their foods from their homelands. The Italians, the Polish, the Greeks, the Lebanese, Arab Americans in general, all brought food from their homeland, something they learned from mom and mom's kitchen, and they just started serving it here. And that defines who we are today. And now, today, we are one of the most richest ethnic culinary communities in probably globally, if you think about it, because we have so many interesting, and I say really interesting people that have brought and honed their cooking skills from around the world, and they serve it up here. And I think a lot of times Detroiters kind of take that for granted. We don't realize just how cool of a city we live in.
Keith, I say that often. I take it for granted myself, this living in this city and being able to experience the food and the people and the cultures that we're able to experience on a daily basis, just literally going 5 to 10 miles up the road and you're learning something new. So that's something that we do tend to take, or at least I personally take for granted. But just thinking a little bit about your work, getting yourself here with the documentary film, 20 years you said in the making. In that 20-year span, what were you collecting and trying to learn? What was going on in that process?
When I started, I've been producing, and I've been really fortunate to work really closely with PBS Detroit over the years, 20-plus years. We've done documentaries about cancer and Alzheimer's and military tribute films and depression and suicide and really rich topics, including historical topics like Detroit City of Churches, Detroit City of Hot Rods and Muscle Cars. But I always wanted to tell the chef's story because I lived it. So this film's very personal to me. It's a majority of my life was spent in the kitchens running restaurants, and I've always felt that this story had to be told. And so it just took me time to get to this, where about 18 months ago I said, we're going to tell this story now. And very fortunate that so many of the hospitality leaders from the Joe Vaccaris and Roger Kriegers and individuals like that stepped on board and said, hey, we'll help you help you make this happen.
Yeah.
And it's where we are today. And so the first documentary, this is actually, there's going to be 2 episodes. The first one premieres, on December, I
believe it's December 12th on
December
PBS.
12th at 9 p.m.
Yeah.
And is really about our history. And it starts in the 1800s. It starts back that far back with early immigrants coming here, where they came from, what they brought, how did the Eastern Market get birthed?
Yeah.
Things of that nature. And then it moves through the 70s and 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and those chefs that really kind of defined our culinary heritage at that stage. And the next episode, which will be next year, really will take a deeper dive into who we are today.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And just to kind of stay in the vein of history a little bit longer, thinking about just, like you said, 1800s, and you're taking this whole look into what the city of Detroit's culinary scene was and what it's turned into. Oftentimes I think about pierogies. I don't know why that's something that jumps in my head as a pierogi, but I think about a pierogi and I think about where it came from and how it got here and the journey that it took to get to Detroit, or even the punchki, I believe. So I think about, just the different influences and how every time there was a new wave of immigration into the city of Detroit, it brought in a new culinary a lens that we can go and look through. So if you could just talk a little bit about Eastern Market and build into how Eastern Market and that early Detroit's culinary scene bleeds into today.
So years ago, I wrote a book. I had a series on Food Network years ago, and I wrote a book called "You Really Haven't Been There Till You've Eaten the Food." And I think that whole attitude of "you really haven't been there till you've eaten the food" should be a media campaign for Detroit. So when tourists come to Detroit or convention goers come to Detroit, the attitude of "you really haven't been to Detroit till you've eaten the food." You need to go on a eating pilgrimage. I think that's really important. As far as the Eastern Market goes, if you stop and think about it, the Eastern Market was really founded by immigrants. Mm-hmm. They needed a place where they could gather to buy things that they wanted, and they would bring from their homelands or import from their homelands. So you had the Italians down there, you had the Greeks down there, you had the Arab Americans down there, and they all had some kind of role that they played. Either was it produce, or whether it was meats, or it was sausage making, or cheeses, or spices from around the world that they brought with them. It was really just a community gathering place to people could come and buy things that they could find in their homeland they wouldn't find in a normal grocery store or store. That was the birth of the Eastern Market. We all go to Eastern Market now, but the rich traditions and the rich heritage there is so, if the walls could talk, just imagine the stories they could tell.
I'm thinking about that right now, and just it coming to an existence, Eastern Market in that area, and what it probably meant especially what it meant to the immigrant population when it was at its truly peak in the beginning when it opened its doors.
Well, it was a touch of home for them.
Yeah.
It was a touch of home, both from a food standpoint, but also from a language standpoint, from just being comfortable around individuals that were doing something they did in their homeland. A lot of the Italians that came here were produce dealers in some way or form in their homeland, so they knew how to sell produce. They knew how to grow produce. They knew how to present it. Same thing with spice trade and butchers and so on. So in a lot of ways, it was not only just about food, but it was all about family and community and being around each other. And uniquely, just like any other neighborhood, restaurants were birthed in an area where their community, their neighborhood grew. As you'd put up a church, restaurants would grow, would grow as well to serve the food to the people of that community that lived in that neighborhood that could understand it. And then as outsiders, we'd go, hey, let's go to that community. Well, now, the term "let's go to Greektown," or is rolls off our tongue. Yeah. But Greektown was just an area. It was an area where the immigrant Greeks and Italians gathered, and Arab Americans that formed that area, and of course the Greeks. This is really a strong presence for the Greek community. Yeah,
yes. Once again, as you were saying these things, my brain is like, oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, that's right. It's not just Greektown. It means something culturally, and it's significant to the Greek people here in the city of Detroit.
And then what happened in the 60s, late 50s and 60s, when the automotive executives started traveling around the world, and because we were the automotive capital of the world. So they would travel around the world and they'd come back with these discerning palates. They've eaten something someplace and so on. And all of a sudden, this understanding of food translated to chefs. And back then, you wanted to go get a really interesting, great meal with a high-level quality of food, you had to go to country clubs like the DAC or Detroit Club, the Grosse Pointe Yacht Club, Orchard Hills, and so on. Eventually, those chefs of those country clubs opened their own restaurants. And then that birthed a whole new era. And then those group of chefs, the Douglases and the Miloses and Yvonne Gills, birthed this next generation. I like to refer to as the Brat Packs, the Brian Polsons, the Ed Janices, the Jimmy Schmidts, the Keith Famies, if you will, the Mary Brady's, and who we had a chance to work for those individuals. And then we opened our own restaurants with our own footprint, with our own global understanding, because we started traveling around the world and we are moved by the great chefs of France. And then that group of chefs trained another group of chefs. And then you can't forget Schoolcraft College, one of the most dynamic culinary colleges in the country, as well as OCC College. We have two amazing community colleges here that do outstanding, their desires to teach food from around the world has enabled us to be on the global market and the global scene, if you will. So it's pretty exciting.
And, there are so many different things that we can get into, especially when we talk about the education aspect that you just brought up, because I know so many folks may, have their thoughts or their opinions about community college or, what it may be. But you're telling us right now that this truly is a space and a place in the city, community college, but just in the city of Detroit right now, it's growing because we have educators that are in these spaces that are really pushing the culinary scene here. You
can't go to one of the major restaurants in the city. I mean, you throw a stone in any direction, you're going to hit some young cook, student, or chef that either went to OCC or Schoolcraft College, or a college from abroad. But we have such a powerful movement of culinary educators in our community and master chefs. It's really something to be excited about.
I love hearing that. If you are listening, which I know you're listening to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio, I'm Tia Graham with Robin Vincent, and we're speaking about Detroit's culinary scene with Keith Famie. He's the director of a new film called Detroit, the City of Chefs. This is, we can say, part one.
This is part one. This will be a two-part series.
Yeah, so we're talking about part one, and we're going to be talking about his premiere, which is happening at the Imagine Theater in Novi, December 9th as well. But just getting back into this conversation, if we were able to get into a time machine right now, travel back to Eastern Market in a day, what would stand out to us now? What would be so different? Like you said, the walls could talk in Eastern Market. So what would stand out to us? What would we notice?
I think that you'd probably notice how diverse ethnically the community was back then, and narratively. You'd hear dialects that we probably don't hear on a regular basis today. Really diverse dialects. That early broken English, trying to understand English at the same time trying to be a business person within a merchant, situation. So I think that would be fascinating. And the rawness of it. You'd see the real rawness of produce and meats and things that came in from other parts of the world. I think that would be fascinating. And if you're going back in time and you knew the future, you'd say, oh, I see where this is all going. How cool is it that I'm part of this?
Right? That's amazing. So, Keith, bringing it back to the film, bringing it back to the documentary, you are holding a figurine right now. And these figurines are actually really, really cool. Can you give us a little bit of what they are?
So chefs are whimsical by nature. Okay. When in starting out on creating this story, I wanted to open the film in a fun, creative way. And I felt we collaborated with the College of Creative Studies, and I came up with 19 different chefs or restaurateur icons, and they took them 19 weeks to create full-on look-alike chefs and restaurateurs, Molly Abraham, Joe Muir, different chefs, all out of clay. And the film opens with a stop motion where they climb down a cake, play a song using kitchen instruments that we actually recorded the song in studio with chefs using kitchen instruments. And that's the way the film opens. And I felt that CCS, which is another brilliant college for creative speaking, creative thinking individuals, I thought a collaboration with them just made sense. So it's exciting to have them part of this as well.
And, for folks, that is such a tedious process when we talk about using the claymation and clay animation. It takes a very long time, not just to create the figurines, but to actually put it together. It's a long process. Do you know estimate how long it took?
Them 19 weeks. It was a very long journey.
Oh, wow.
And it was only for, it's the opening of the film.
Yeah.
And, we closed the film in a really special way. They're referred to as puppets. They all come back on the scene, and they bring up a sign that says they may be gone, but they'll never be forgotten. And we step into right before the credit roll, we step into it with images of all those that meant so much to us to have passed on, either their names or their images, which is really touching.
That is just so cool. 19 weeks to be a part of that film. That's amazing. So, Keith, once again, you are a chef yourself, so you have experience, you have knowledge, you have something that you could pull from when you were putting this movie together. Why did you want to tell these particular stories in the way you did, especially after having the experience of your father passing away and things just kind of changing for you?
Yeah. So, when I you caught me on kind of a personal moment. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So no, it's fine. So in 2023, I had my own series on Food Network and cookbooks and all that, and traveled all the world, did cooking shows, and it was really exciting time and And I took care of my dad who had Alzheimer's, and he passed away in 2003. And when he took his last breath, and my mom and I were sitting there, I don't know. I thought, I don't want to be this chef guy anymore. I don't want to be this adventure chef guy anymore. I want to do something different. And I just felt I knew how to do production. I already owned my production company. I knew how to tell stories. I traveled all over the world. I had fortunate to do that. And I'm kind of a curious cat in nature. I thought maybe I can help people tell their stories. And so we set out and decided that I hung up my apron, still cooking, using different ingredients. But I decided that we wanted to really tell a story uniquely about life and put the mirror on the audience so that the audience looks at themselves and says, how did this story affect me? How did this benefit me? How did this enrich my life? How does this story maybe teaching me to be a better person? And we did a film about Down syndrome as an example. It was just a fluke that I stumbled upon a young man in Kroger's, and I was shopping, and he had Down syndrome, and I thought, we're doing a film about that. And I called it Chromosomally Enhanced. What's your superpower? And for me, their superpowers are nice.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, there's a great lesson here. People can learn about themselves through individuals who live and thrive with Down syndrome and the families that love them. So that's the kind of stories that we do. And so even in this film, even in our film about chefs, there's some very emotional moments within the story that people won't necessarily see coming. But the story is Detroit, the city of chefs, is really less about food, this first one. It's really more about people and the lives and the journeys that they've been on. And, we close with, we are very fortunate. We have a great relationship with, I think Jill Jack, the singer-songwriter. She did the song that closes the credits, closes the film, and it's all about the grittiness of Detroit and Detroit chefs. And I think that when it's all over, what we have created will always stand as a historical reminder of who we are as a culinary heritage in the Motor City of Detroit.
Keith, that's just like one of the perfect segues there. I mean, or just the perfect endings almost. I think about the way that food impacts us all with stories and, like you said, holding history in such a way that you can taste it on your tongue when you're eating the food. You can feel it when you see the person's making the food. It's just something about it, especially here in the city of Detroit, that's so special and so unique. So, we've been talking a little bit about Detroit, its restaurants, especially as it's growing, and we're seeing it grow with restaurants like Baobab Fair and Vicino in Detroit, and even the Glass Onion downriver. We're seeing so many new spaces pop up. What sets Detroit's food scene apart, especially as we talk about today's world?
Well, I coined our chef community with 3 words: dedicated, daring, and defiant. And I'd like to think that sets us apart. I think that putting the cooking and the food aside, our people, our hospitality community, our community at large, by nature is dedicated, daring, and defiant. That's kind of who we are as Detroiters, and this is for sure who we are as chefs. So I think that sets us apart right away. We will not take a backseat to anybody. We were always considered a flyover city at one time, but I think that now globally, for sure nationally, people come to Detroit and say, I need to go check out the food scene there. Maybe I can learn something and take it back to my restaurant in Iowa or my restaurant in Oklahoma or my restaurant in Florida, because we've got great chefs. We have chefs that have moved here from places like New York and Chicago to build their restaurants, to build their empires. Why is that? They wanted to be a part of who we are. That's exciting. They wanted to be a part of who we are. They're not leaving the city. They're coming to the city. We should all be proud of that.
I mean, extremely proud of that. Keith, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro. Chef, producer, and award-winning director, that is Keith Famie. Keith's new film, Detroit, the City of Chefs, will premiere Monday, December 9th at the Imagine Theater in Novi. And the film will also premiere on PBS on December 12th at 9 p.m. Once again, this is part 1. We're expecting part 2 next year, and we look forward to talking to you about that.
Thank you. And if you come to the premiere, we've got a whole chef alley there. There's all kinds of things happening. If you have a ticket that you bought for a 7:30, you want to be there by 7 just to enjoy some of the things you get to see and buy and taste and smell.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was an honor to be here. Thank you.
From the WDET newsroom, the Belle Isle Conservatory announced the Anna Scripps Whitcomb Conservatory is reopening on Wednesday. The 100-year-old building has been closed to the public for renovations since 2022. This work completes the final phase of the plan to renovate the upper 60 feet of the 80-foot-tall conservatory dome. It's one of the nation's oldest turn-of-the-century glass houses still in existence. Also, the holiday season, it's in full swing. So in the 11 o'clock hour, we want to know about your holiday traditions. What are you most looking forward to this holiday season? And what's something you least enjoy about the holidays? Let us know. The number to call is 313-577-1019.
Coming up, a lot of money that could be going to parks and recreational spaces is going to business development in Detroit. Should that be the case? The Metro's Carrie Jr. II delves into that question next. Stay right there. On WDET FM Detroit Public Radio, I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Looking outside, there's a little bit of snow on the ground. It's looking icy. It means the holiday season is underway. So in the 11 o'clock hour, we're going to be talking about holiday traditions, what you're looking forward to, what you might be dreading about the holidays, what kinds of traditions you're trying to maintain or new ones you're trying to start. Let us know by calling 313-577-1019.
But first, anytime a major developer announces a new plan and requests tax incentives, we got a number of questions. Why are major companies asking for financial assistance? Are the residents paying for this project? Could funding public services be a better use for that money? It can be complicated, and we wanted to untangle some of that confusion by uncovering just how these incentives constantly find their way into public discourse.
The city of Detroit issued 171 tax incentives over the span of 6 years. That was to stimulate economic growth in the city, and that's according to a report by the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. But what might those tax incentives take away from the city? Producer Carrie Jr. II spoke with Eric Lufer. He's the president of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan, and they discussed what the incentives mean for residents like us and why the city relies so heavily on them.
Eric, thanks for joining me. The Citizens Research Council of Michigan recently released a report in October that assessed the city of Detroit's tax incentive history. Can you first tell me, just so people understand, what is like a tax incentive and how does that differ from, when a business might use public tax dollars for something?
Right. So the idea of economic development is using public resources to attract a business or also residential properties. What the state is currently doing is just setting aside part of your budget and telling a developer, if you come to our community, we will help you with land acquisition and putting the water and sewer and enhancing the street so the traffic can get to your facility or what have you. The other part is tax incentives. Typically, a tax incentive works to tell a business, if you locate in our community, we will knock your taxes down by about 50%. I, as a resident of the community, am not foregoing anything of substance to get that business to come here. I'm not paying more taxes. I'm not losing out on taxes, really. Mm-hmm. But the community isn't going to grow the tax base for the full amount for some short period of time, usually 10 to 12 years, while that tax abatement is there. It's what we call the but-for argument. Would that development happen but for the incentive?
So what's the goal? Is the government planning to make up the tax dollars once the incentive expires?
From the private developer point of view, the Dan Gilberts and Illiches and a lot of other people that are getting into this, they're not doing this to lose money. It's an investment that they want to make money on. From the government point of view, why are you doing this? First is the property taxes. After some 10 or 12 years, right, you expect that that business is going to stay in the city and now be taxed at the same amount as everyone else and contribute to the tax rolls.
Which is more than it would be if there was no development in the first place, theoretically.
Right. The idea is, if you do nothing, then you still have an empty lot that nobody's built on. Right. And you're not getting any tax dollars from that. Detroit has an income tax. So from day one, when you have construction people building that building or rehabbing a building, they're paying income taxes. And eventually it's a building that's usable and you start putting workers in there, they're paying income tax from day one. And that's part of Detroit's strategy is, let's forego some property tax revenue to grow the income tax base and have that come in.
The Citizens Research Council found that the city of Detroit issued 171 tax incentives over a period of 6 years.
Yeah, so that was from the period of 2017 to 2023, more than 20 a year. Most of it is the commercial rehabilitation, using obsolete property acts and commercial rehabilitation acts. That's the big share, and a lot of it is what they call neighborhood enterprise zones, but it's apartment buildings and duplexes and things like that, creating affordable housing and housing opportunities for people to be in the city after we've torn down so many single family homes and everything like that. If we're going to rebuild the population, there needs to be a place for people to stay. So it's commercial and residential has made up the biggest share of it.
So when I think of some of the developments and I hear about tax incentive abatements, even recently the announcement with the Renaissance Center, right? They're going to transform and redevelop that area. And they're also asking for some tax incentives for that as well. Does that play into something like this? Because the public reaction can sometimes be like, oh, why are we using our tax dollars for this development, right? Why don't we put it towards our schools or something like that? even though you just outlined how it's not directly using the money that we pay in taxes, citizens pay in taxes, can you talk about the tie between the investment in public goods that directly impact the day-to-day Detroiters versus something that's more long-term, like these developments?
It wasn't until the 1970s that we really acted on the idea that government can be a participant with the business in trying to facilitate that economic location decision through incentives and through the tax increment financing activities, things like that. So the idea is, if you don't invest in the community, if you're not bringing developers in to put jobs into those office buildings, to not create storefronts, to not have a reason for people to be downtown, then the tax base just continues to deteriorate.
Doesn't what you just said assume that the investments in public schools or roads or, I don't know, public services doesn't directly fuel the tax base the way that building up businesses does?
It does, but it's not as direct.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. It's like the public version of long term, right? If we're talking about the business version, it's these incentives that take a decade before we recoup the direct profits. But then you're talking about, if we invest in schools, we have to wait for those students to grow up and get jobs and start businesses in the city, right? Is this a fair, or am I stretching too far?
No, you're spot on.
Okay.
They go hand in hand, right? So these acts have been in place since the 1970s. They were using these laws to try to bring businesses into the community,
right? But
Detroit wasn't better off for it. I mean, maybe it could have been worse off because of it. The schools were suffering. The police took a long time to respond to emergencies. The blighted properties were a problem, things like that. So they have to go hand in hand. You have to do government right, and you need to bring in the businesses to expand your tax base and continue to do this type of thing. So, the idea that you're foregoing something so that Gilbert can participate with GM and change the RenCen to whatever its new RenCen 2.0 will be. If they do nothing, what happens to the RenCen? Does it become the new train station that sits empty for a generation? We don't know. It's going to take money to fix it up. This is their vision of it. And since they own it, they get to make those decisions. We get to choose whether we want to participate or not through our elected officials.
Sure, not maybe, but do incentives like this strap the government because they don't have the tax income from the years that they forego? Does that strap the government from being able to invest in public goods, services, schools, that kind of thing?
There is that tension, and I don't want to dismiss that. But again, if you do nothing, would the Westin Hotel still be sitting empty? Would the Cadillac Tower still be sitting empty? Would you rather have no loaf of bread, half a loaf of bread, or a whole loaf of bread? Eventually, you'll get that whole loaf of bread, but you have to forego something. Doing nothing leaves you only taxing the residents who, for 6 decades, have been leaving because they don't like that tax rate.
How do we know if these investments and these tax incentives pay off for us?
The city's not collecting the data. This is 2024. Could we go back to a tax abatement that was granted in 2010 and say, is that company still here? How many workers? Nobody's collecting that data to do the analysis. The city needs to act tomorrow to create a database, whether that's contained within the city or a outward public-facing resource for people to look at. If the city is going to be this active in tax abatements and tax incentives, transparency is very important, and they should make that a priority. Is
this sustainable? Should we be finding other alternatives to building up our tax base or bringing businesses to the city?
The goal is to wean the city off of tax abatements.
Why is that?
Well, you want a prospering city that people want to be in, people want to work in, people want to live in. And if that's happening, then the rents you can charge for the businesses will be high enough to pay for the development that occurs. New York and Los Angeles and Chicago, the demand is high enough that they can charge crazy rents and get that. Detroit can't do that yet. And a lot of other Midwest cities, the economics don't work. The city has to deal with its taxes. The property tax rate is amongst the highest in the state. It is not the highest, but it's very high. And that's a disincentive to be in the city. Mm-hmm. The bottom line is that government services are paid with tax dollars. So they have to do the basics. They have to cut the cost of being in the city. At the same time, using these tax abatements strategically to continue to build up the downtown, continue to build up the tax base, to continue to have income tax producing jobs that will pay for those services.
All right. Well, Eric Lufer, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
It has been absolutely my pleasure.
Eric Lufer is the CEO of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. Lufer spoke with producer Carrie Jr. II about the city of Detroit's frequent use of tax incentives in recent years.
Coming up in the 11 o'clock hour, we're trying desperately to warm up right now. So we're going to discuss some of your favorite holiday traditions. What are you most looking forward to this holiday season? What is something you least enjoy about the holidays? Is this a time of joy, a time of sadness for you? We want to know. Give us a call, 313-577-1019.
From the WDET newsroom, Mayor Mike Duggan is expected to name a new director of planning and development soon. Antoine Bryan has held the position since 2021, and he leaves for a new job in the private sector. Bryan's last day as director is December 27th, and Duggan is on the hunt for a replacement.
Also, the Defense Department is tightening its cleanup standards for toxic chemicals near military bases, but this approach is still 3 times weaker than federal drinking water protections. National standards on PFAS only apply to public water suppliers. For people with contaminated private wells, the Pentagon now says it will clean up the worst ones first. A Defense Department spokesperson says the new rules take effect immediately, but could be adjusted later.
Coming up, it's the holiday season in the D, and as such, we'll be chatting about a long-time tradition in Detroit that's celebrating its 50th year. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM, Detroit's NPR station. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. And it's the holiday season. Mariah is on nonstop. I have not turned her off yet. And so next hour, we want to know about your holiday traditions. What are you most looking forward to this holiday season? And what is something you least enjoy about the holidays? Let us know. Give us a call, 313-577-1019.
And speaking of the holidays, the city of Detroit is already donned in its holiday drip following the tree lighting. And like most of Detroit, every year in early December, holiday cheer cascades onto Midtown in Detroit.
For one night, the neighborhood transforms into a Christmas wonderland. Noel Night offers live music performances, holiday shopping, and food attractions. And this year celebrates the event's 50th anniversary.
That's right, Tia. And WDET is a media partner for Noel Night, and we here at Detroit Public Radio encourage you, our listener, to stop by on Saturday from 3 to 10 p.m. and say hi to us.
Say hello. Maureen Stapleton is the interim director of Midtown Detroit Inc., the nonprofit group that organizes Noel Night. And also joining the show is Janet Jones, the founder and owner of Source Booksellers in Detroit. It's one of the featured local businesses participating in Noel Night. Maureen and Janet, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you.
Of course. Maureen, we're starting with you. What was the event's original purpose when it began 50 years ago?
50 years ago, it was about celebrating Detroit and celebrating all that the cultural center and the businesses around the cultural center have meant to Detroit. And what it's grown into is just amazing 50 years later.
And Maureen, you're a native Detroiter. And so when I think about 50 years of this and I think about the work that you've been able to do in both the private and, a community sector, both of the nonprofits, private sector across the city of Detroit, what makes you the most proud about the growth that you've seen in Noel Night?
First of all, I'm going to date myself. I was there at the first Noel Night, so that should tell you exactly. I'm a little older than 50 years old. What makes me most proud is the cultural diversity of the activities of the day, as well as the participants and those who come in and enjoy. We have cultural institutions that are some of the finest in the country that are on display. And it actually starts a little before 3. At 11 o'clock in the morning, families can come down and begin to experience all that Noel Night has been for the last 50 years. We are now Noel Day and Night. Yeah. So we're rolling actually from 11 in the morning to 9 o'clock at night. And so in addition to putting our cultural centers on display, we have small businesses that are going to open their doors and be ready to serve. You can buy every Christmas gift you need right here in Midtown and not have to pay as much for parking.
And I love this, Maureen, this notion of really celebrating Midtown and it being this cultural gem in the city. I think about when I moved back to Detroit after being away for many years and spending time here in the Cass Corridor and more broadly in Midtown. It gets me emotional still. And that brings me, Janet, to you and to Source Booksellers. I wonder what Noel Night has meant for your shop.
Well, first of all, it means lots of people come to the area, and we hopefully have lots of buying customers. But if we don't have buying customers, we get a lot of attention from people who may or may not know about us. Frequently, I've had people come in during the year and tell us that they have come to the store during Noel Night. They specifically say Noel Night. So I'm always pleased for people to come, and we try to make it warm and welcoming, and glad that they're here.
So in addition to the warm welcome that people get when they stop by Source Booksellers, what else can they expect when they come into the shop on Noel Night?
Well, this year we're going to have a DJ, a young man whose name is Rashid Dobbins. Yes, he's going to be here. And he's such an interesting young man because he's taken over a church that has been given by the Diocese of Michigan, the Episcopal Church, which happens to be the church of my old neighborhood where I grew up and grew in that area. And so he has a program for children learning, young people, I should say teenagers, learning how to be DJs and learning all the mechanics of that at the place. So he's going to DJ for us at Source Booksellers in the evening time.
You know what that brings to mind for me too, Janet, is just the idea that bookstores can be this really important cultural and community crossroads for people. And as I'm thinking about the DJing and Noel Night and folks coming in and browsing the books, that's what I'm envisioning is it being this opportunity for people to really interact.
Right. Well, we know as independent bookstores, we are a third place.
That's right.
Where people can come and gather and meet and know each other and know about the products. We're not transactional. We just don't do the quick, fast buy, but rather be inclusive to people. And it's our way of reaching to the community as the community reaches back to us. So that's really what our mission is in this place called Midtown, which I like to call the heart of the city, where we live, work, play, learn, and heal, because all of that is right here in the middle is the heart of the city.
I love that because I think about Midtown, this Cass Corridor, this particular area in general, how walkable it is, which makes it that much more easy to actually be around during Noel Night and interact during Noel Night. So bringing Maureen back into the conversation here, we're talking about the event itself, Noel Night, 50 years of it, of course. But, over the past years, especially folks have been concerned about safety. We had the I like to call them the free range teens that were out and about a few years ago during Noel Night. So, what do you say to folks who are concerned about safety?
We are a totally safe, family-friendly event. We have worked with our security and police officials at Wayne State and the Detroit Police Department. This is not a fearful environment. This is a welcome and opening environment. We also want parents to know that after 8 p.m., they need to be with their children. And if their children are in Midtown without being proper supervision, parents will be receiving tickets as well as young folks. So we want to ensure that, one, children come, they enjoy, they are properly supervised, they are welcomed, and at 8 p.m. they are with their parents.
I think that's very important, and it needs to be really, really hit on. We need to hit on that one more time. At 8 p.m., I'm assuming 18 and under?
18 and under, 8 p.m. must be accompanied by a parent or an adult. If that child is found and not with the appropriate person, they will get a ticket and the parent will as well.
Well, you know what? This may be the first time you're hearing that, but there you are. You will be ticketed if you're a kid, 18 and under, and parents, you will be receiving a ticket as well. So just continuing the conversation, of course, Janet, just talking about Source Booksellers, and for myself personally, I walk by and I love to look at the display you have in the window or some of the posters you may have up. But talk about how Noel Night converts people like myself who are just kind of window shoppers into actual shoppers.
Well, first of all, I have a reputation of going out and nabbing people on the street, so I just might bring you in with my thumbs. Okay. But we try to let people know about books. They often say, "Oh, what's the hot book?" Well, we don't really have hot books.
Yeah.
I try to help people know that they have a literary journey, just like we're going other places, but our literary journey will tell us what we're doing, and people are learning about books in so many different ways now, and they come in sometimes with their phone in my face to say, do you have this? And if I do or if I don't, I can lead them to something else or teach them something else. I had a young woman come in one day that said, I want to learn how to read a book. I said, okay, do you know how to read? She said, oh yeah, I know how to read, but I want to learn how to read a book. So I reached way back into my history and remember that my mother had a book. It was called How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler. And it was like in 1950s, I think, like that. And I remembered that there is a way to read a book, so I taught her how to do that. Wow. I don't know what's happened to her. I don't even remember what she looked like or if she has ever come back in the store. But a lot of people have to learn now how to read a book because they've learned how to read the machine, the telephone and the TV and all these other things that we have now. But reading a book there's a way to do that too. Not flipping. People come in and flip the pages, right?
Yeah, Janet, you're just highlighting here again the importance of independent booksellers and the crucial role that they play in the community. And Maureen, back to you. I want you to talk about what it means to have other important local organizations and shops open their doors, including WDET is one of them. We are really excited to be a part of this, and we're going to have our doors open for fans of the station or people just curious to come on in and do a tour, and they might even see the Metro team here. So talk about what it means for other local organizations, Maureen, to be part of this.
For our cultural centers, it is business as usual with a twist. Additional opportunities to have arts and culture immersed in their environments. For our businesses, sometimes it's 10, 12, 15% of their annual Christmas intake because people come and they purchase. For our restaurants and bars, it's an opportunity to truly kick off the holiday season. But I think the thing that's most important is that Midtown was responsible for the resurgence of Detroit. It started here in 1976 when no one thought in the old Cass Corridor that we call now North and South Cass now that it would make a difference. But it's exploded. And as it has exploded, we have expanded Noel Night to include our restaurants, to include our merchants, and we're just excited. It's Detroit's open house. And we're excited to receive everyone down this Saturday.
This is the Metro on WDET FM. We're speaking with Maureen Stapleton, the interim director of Midtown Inc., and Janet Jones of Source Booksellers. We're chatting about the 50th iteration of Noel Night in Midtown Detroit, happening this coming weekend.
And, before we let both of you go, just any tips or anything that folks should know, we're going to start with you, Maureen. Any tips in 30 seconds or less?
Please visit over the next several days. It will be updated daily, noelnight.org. Again, please visit noelnight.org and plan your visit. Don't miss the Detroit Youth Choir at the Garden Theater. And all the activities we have at the museums and in the businesses around Midtown.
Yeah, we love Detroit Youth Choir. Janet?
Don't forget about a Midtown Bingo. We have a little bingo card. If you haven't gotten yours, you better come get it. And there's a prize waiting for you at the end.
Maureen Stapleton and Janet Jones, thank you so much for joining the Metro. Noel Night is this Saturday, December 7th. WDET is proud to be the radio partner for Noel Night, and we'll open our doors from 3 to 10 p.m.
This is the Metro, and we've stepped into the holiday season, as you've heard. So next, we want to know about your holiday traditions. What are you looking forward to this holiday season? And what's something you least enjoy about the holidays? Let us know. It's 313-577-1019. We have a guest on the phone already, and we're looking for your guys' calls.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. The second hour of the Metro is next, but first, it's news from NPR. Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. We're now in December and snow is on the ground. So today we're discussing holiday traditions. Robin, do you have any?
Well, let's see, Tia. I would say the longest standing tradition among my family members is excess. Excessive food. Excessive drinks, and typically a fierce poker game where my mom, card shark Michelle, takes everyone's money, but it's like pennies. So we're not betting big. What about you, T?
Oh my Lanta, Michelle. The
Watch
poker
out for
face.
Michelle.
I know, the poker face. But yes, every Christmas Eve we gather as a family before Christmas Day, and we get together. We open presents. We do Secret Santa, so that's always fun to kind of open the presents for Secret Santa and just kind of be around the family and do all the fun stuff with the family. But my favorite is Secret Santa with because you never know
the suspense,
and they're just a lively bunch, so you never know what they're gonna pick from that list.
Someone's a trickster. Someone's gonna gift you with something absurd.
Yeah, and I'm always told that I ask for weird things. Like I asked for a coffee maker. You can find a coffee maker cheaply.
Yeah, and that's so functional. That's a very...
They looked at me like, don't put that on the list. So, yeah, I'm not going to do that again.
Admonished for your request.
Yeah. No to coffee makers. But we want to know from you. We want to hear from you. What are your holiday traditions? What are you most looking forward to this holiday season? And what is something that you least enjoy about the holidays? You can give us a call. It's 313-577-1019. We want to hear from you.
That's right. With Thanksgiving now in our rearview mirrors, this holiday season in the U.S. is officially underway. Over the weekend at Eastern Market, crowds of shoppers were loading their bags with gifts and filling their pickup trucks with Christmas trees. Meanwhile, downtown at Campus Martius, clusters of skaters weaved and bobbed and sometimes flailed in a circular motion at the ice skating rink. And from Detroit to Royal Oak to Canton, dazzling displays of holiday lights have begun twinkling above the streets. So all of this has us thinking about holiday traditions and the vastly different ways that people across the world usher in this holiday season. So we've got Professor Aaron Gale on the line. He's a scholar of religious studies at West Virginia University. Professor Gale, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So first, Professor Gale, before we get into holiday traditions around the world, I'm curious what compelled you to become a scholar of world religions.
Well, as I tell my students, even though I'm in religious studies, I'm not actually a theologian. I was always interested in ancient history. As I tell my students, I'm a frustrated stand-up comic and ancient historian, so I sort of made a career out of combining the two. But I loved ancient history. Always loved stuff about the Roman Empire, the history of religions. I myself come from a Jewish background, so interested in the history of Judaism and Hanukkah holiday in December and all that stuff. And so I sort of was able to conform that. I also did archaeology in Israel, so I liked that type of ancient history. And I sort of formulated all that, became very interested as I traveled. And I've been fortunate over the past 25 years or so at WVU. I was able to travel to Europe, the Middle East, the Far East. And as I went there, I began thinking about things that my students would be interested in. And the more I explored these other regions of the world, I began to realize just how diverse and how interesting the history of religious traditions really was and is.
And how these common threads are weaved into each of these things you've talked about when it comes to archaeology and history. When you take a world religions class, you realize that this is very much a course that is rooted in those things, in history, in archaeology. Could you talk about some of the common threads that you found when it comes to religions themselves that you teach?
Well, many religions I do teach world religions. I was trained as a biblical scholar. As I said, I've traveled all over the world. I actually wrote the textbook for my current Introduction to World Religions course, which I still teach online. And some of the themes I have found are obviously themes of love, being kind to others, living in when I get to, even in Hinduism and Buddhism, when I teach that, there's always this precept of living a selfless life versus a selfish life. And that's something that many world religions have in common. But many common threads of living a good, moral, ethical life, devoid of, stealing and things like that. Really, and I remember years and years ago when I was even, I think an undergraduate or graduate student, we all had to prepare an exam, a mock exam for a religions class. And I cited a bunch of quotations about how important it was to treat other human beings kindly and to love other human beings. And on one side of the paper, I had the list of quotes. And on the other side of the paper, I had a list of people, Jesus, Buddha, whoever. And when people went to take the quiz, they were amazed that all these quotations, they couldn't differentiate between the different people who had said what, because all the messages were so eerily similar. So many common ideas. As I tell my world religion students, when I teach world religions, and my approach is very historical, of course, I always tell them we never get away from ethics. We never get away from living a good life. So those are many threads. Religiously, we do see some threads. Religions, of course, different religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, what have you. They're diverse. They're unique in their own ways, but they do share commonalities. Of course, Christianity owes its roots, for example, to Judaism. The first Christians were Jews. Jesus was a Jew. Jesus was not a Christian. So we find many of these converging lines of evidence, if you will, when we look at various world religions. They're not always a direct correlation, but it's certainly interesting to put things in perspective and compare when it is, appropriate.
And it's so ironic, Professor Gale, because we know that there are all of these commonalities between the many world religions that you've just mentioned, and yet religion tends to be this dividing line. It tends to be something that conflicts and wars erupt around. I wonder if that notion comes up in your classes.
Well, yeah, of course it does. That,
the irony of it all, really.
Yeah, there is an irony all that, most religions, advocate for a peaceful life, for living a good, healthy life and things like that, not judging others. I think many religions, especially, of course, the big three monotheistic religions in the United States that we're most familiar with, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, most all of them say, only God judges. We don't really have the right to judge. But yet, of course, in war and in conflict, of course, it seems as if we are, most of the time for worse, we are judging others when maybe we should be sitting back and listening to others and communicating with each other and learning from each other. Long time ago, when I was first early in my career after 9/11, I was interviewed, I think in the Houston Chronicle or somewhere, about 9/11 and conflict among world religions. And I said, I think one of the things that keeps religions apart, that keeps us from being apart, is because we don't do enough of what you're doing right now in this radio show. They don't discuss. And so I think one of my quotes that I said to this newspaper was, communication leads to understanding, and understanding leads to peace. I think that's how I framed it in that article. Because quite honestly, I think a lot of the time, even when students take a world religions class, they learn so much about other religions, it becomes less scary.
Sure.
Oh, I didn't know that Jews did that. Oh, I didn't know Islam is really about that. And I think it's maybe the irony, if you will, is created because maybe we just don't take enough time to engage in meaningful dialogue.
Professor Gale, on telling us to listen more and maybe talk a little bit less. This is the Metro on WDET. We're speaking with Professor Aaron Gale about holiday traditions around the world.
And, that's right, Robin, thinking about holiday traditions and just thinking about what we just heard from Professor Gale, I often think about the fact that we don't listen enough to one another. I took a Jewish studies class when I was at Michigan State, and that was that moment when I learned that there was something else out there other than what I had gone through as a Black woman in America. So it was very, very eye-opening, and it made me hungry for more. So if you are listening right now and you want to chime in and talk about some of your holiday traditions, what you're looking forward to, what you're not looking forward to, or what the holiday just means to you, it's 313-577-1019. We're looking for your calls.
Now, Professor Gale, let's break down holiday traditions by religion. Could you give us a sense of how many religions observe some kind of holiday tradition this month in the month of December?
Oh, wow. How I have to get all my fingers and toes out to be able to count them. Quite honestly, December is rich with holidays in many diverse world traditions. And part of it, one of the things I preface my answer with is that we have to keep in mind that a lot of these holidays come from ancient traditions, ancient cultures, especially if we talk about European traditions, European cultures. And as I teach my students, we can't read the 21st century into the ancient world. And the month of December, think about what it was like in the ancient world. The month of December, it got cold. It was dark. It was, as I've taught in the past, the ancient world was a very scary place where you lived a very short life. The life expectancy in the ancient world in Europe was probably 30, 35 years. And so December represented a time when the harvests were over, the days were short, the longest nights of the year. And a lot of times I think people got into this mindset that we have to make an offering to the gods, if you will, in the ancient world, or do something, celebrate, hoard our food, keep our food. And so December became a time of transition. It became a time where summer's over, the harvest is over, now we're going into winter, it's cold, no refrigerators, nothing like that. We have to try to survive the winter. So I think it was natural that in December, oh my goodness, there were traditions from the Yule traditions and ancient Germanic European traditions. Yule is still celebrated as kind of a solstice day around December 21st among Wiccans, neo-pagans. So that's one example. Of course, Judaism, Hanukkah, the holiday, the Festival of Lights, typically comes in November or December. Some religions, like Judaism, are on a lunar calendar, so things don't always fall on the exact same day every year. Buddhism across the world celebrates Bodhi Day on December 8th, which celebrates the enlightenment of Prince Siddhartha Gautama, who would become the Buddha. Hindus in India celebrate Panchaganapati, and of course, which is a festival at the end of December. I think it's from December 21st to December 25th, which celebrates Lord Ganesh, one of the Hindu gods, which was interestingly a modern holiday, really started in the 80s. Among the African Americans and Pan-Africa, we, of course, see Kwanzaa, which was developed in 1966 as a way of celebrating Black pride, Black attributes, and, African Americans celebrate that the last week in December into the first of the year. So, my goodness, I mean, December is a really rich time where many diverse traditions seem to understand the transition that probably they were so acutely aware of in the ancient world. And really, December is one of those months with several different traditions. I, of course, spent time in Hungary.
That's right. You were teaching for a semester in Hungary, and I did want to ask you about that because when I was in Hungary, I noticed how the country's recent past, when it was behind the Iron Curtain, how that still is felt today. And when we have a conversation about world religions and how intertwined history is within that, I wonder how that country's recent history affects holiday traditions there, if at all.
Yeah, well, when I was in Hungary several years ago, I taught from September through January. I lived in Hungary. And, some of these countries are still wrestling with the sort of demise of communism. I remember sitting and sharing meals, of course, with my new Hungarian friends that I had made. And when they would talk about what life was like pre-1990, 1991, pre-fall of the wall, so to speak, I remember watching some of my colleagues just break out into tears and cry and say this was 25, 30 years later. And they were, still really upset by that. So, of course, emotion plays into it. But in Hungary and some of the countries in Europe, of course, some of the traditions in December go back to ancient times. For example, on the night of December 5th, going into December 6th in Hungary, and other countries.
Are you there, Professor Gale?
Well, it's sort of a pre-Christmas holiday.
Professor Gale, we've...
In Hungary, it's called the Kulashnapp. And it's kind of a fun tradition that probably goes back to ancient times.
Professor Gale, I don't know if you can hear me, but we're having trouble hearing you.
So on the night of January 5th...
Professor Gale, we're going to have to let you go. We seem to have lost our connection. Thank you so much for speaking with us. That was Professor Aaron Gale talking to us about holiday traditions around the world. And we want to know about your holiday traditions. What are you looking forward to this holiday season? What's something you least enjoy about the holidays? You can let us know by calling 313-577-1019.
This is The Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. And speaking of traditions, one Christmas tradition a lot of people are familiar with is decorations. For one Dearborn woman, the holidays were a chance to share her one-of-a-kind collection with the world and connect with family. WDET's David Lyons spoke with Sandra Nader about her Christmas traditions in 2019.
Sandra Nader loves giving people tours of her home in Dearborn, Michigan.
Merry Christmas.
This is Sandra's 3-foot Santa.
He swivels back and forth.
It's the
He looks like one of those plastic light-up Santas that people put in their yards, only he's right here, in the dining room, singing and dancing. This is just one of the many Christmas decorations in Sandra's collection. So many, in fact, that even she doesn't know the grand total.
Let's see, I've had 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more and more animated stuff. I've got the star, the ribbon, the advent calendar, a saxophone Santa, the toilet roll. They're all rare. My nephew got me the candle. My sister-in-law got me that. And every year it's just grown and grown.
There are angelic choirs, there are jazz Santas with saxes, there are motion-activated snowmen, there's even a stack of brochures detailing Christmas celebrations from around the world. Every nook and cranny of Sandra's one-bedroom apartment is filled with her displays, including the bathroom.
Everybody who comes in the bathroom always comes out and that snowman, it talks.
Hello, here in the bathroom, don't mind me. I'm here to keep you company.
It's cute.
Sandra starts putting up her collection the day after Halloween. She says it takes about a week.
It all started one year when I asked a friend to help me put up my tree. He said, I'll do it next week. He never did. So I ended up putting it up a week before Christmas, and I felt like I was cheated out of Christmas. So I said, next year I'm going to start putting my stuff up right after Thanksgiving, and I'm going to decorate every room of the house.
That was in the mid-90s. Nowadays, she says her friends and family are blown away by her display.
Yeah, they like them. Family doesn't, give you a lot of compliments, but they do like them.
Which is great for Sandra, because she lives alone and loves having company over. For a tour, Christmas trivia, and homemade cookies.
It's fun for me, because I get to see people. We have a good time together. I enjoy my animated things. They're my toys. and I just have fun with them. And it's a blessing to other people because they enjoy them. When I make people laugh or happy, it makes me happy.
Growing up, Sandra says Christmas was a special time.
We decorate a little bit, but that's when we got our best presents. And we always got together as a family.
'Twas the night before Christmas, went all through the house. Not a creature.
When Sandra was 9 years old, she found out Santa wasn't real.
It didn't affect me because my mother said it in a nice way. She said, Santa Claus is the spirit of giving.
Nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of
So I always saw Santa Claus as a symbol of what we should do. Give without wanting anything in return.
Of course, Sandra is all grown up now. She's 70, and her collection allows her to see the world the way children do.
After I was done decorating one year, I was sitting on the floor in the living room, looking around, and I said, this looks like a child's playroom. And I said, that's what it's all about. We need to save that good part of the child through our adult life. I got that from LTD Kellogg.
Can you describe for people who can't see it?
It's a snowman on the floor rolling around laughing like he had too much eggnog.
The dancing Santas, the talking nativity scenes, the giggling snowman, everything in Sandra's display is a gift to herself and to others.
Every year has had its memories. But to be honest with you, the memories that I create now with my displays and with people coming over to see everything, those are my best memories. Getting together with my friends and seeing how people are, how happy and they are to come to my house. It's like all the stress from the holidays are just wiped away when they come in here. and they really start to feel the joy of the holiday and have a great time. And that's the biggest and best memory.
But I heard him exclaim as he drove out of sight, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night."
That was our senior producer, David Lyons. He spoke with Sandra Nader in 2019, and Sandra passed away in 2022. That is one of my favorite holiday traditions every year at WDET is listening to Sandra Nader.
Thanks for bringing that one to us, Dave. Coming up, we'll discuss why the holidays can be a really hard time for some folks and what can be done to address that.
And we also want to hear from you. What are you looking forward to this holiday season? What's something you least enjoy about the holiday seasons? Let us know. The number is 313-577-1019.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET FM, Detroit's NPR station. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. And for some, it's the most wonderful time of the year. Kids are jingle belling.
Maybe
in
some
streets.
kings.
Some kings and some queens as well. Yes,
right.
You're right. Princesses and princes, court gestures. But kids are jingling. They're bailing through the streets. And people are trying to tell you to be cheerful. But if you're not in that holiday mood, what do you do? And what if this season is tied to painful memories?
Yeah, the holidays are a time where we hear a lot about gratitude, about joy and spending time with family. But the holiday season brings a whole range of emotions and experiences with it. For some people, the holidays are just plain stressful. For others, they're marked by the absence of friends and family.
That's why we're talking about mental health during the holidays. How are you feeling today? Excited, anxious, maybe even overwhelmed? How do you take care of yourself during the holiday season? Once again, give us a call. Let us know. It's 313-577-1019.
We've got two great guests joining us to talk about mental health during the holidays. Dr. Cindy Morgan is a clinical psychologist who specializes in grief, loss, and anxiety. And she speaks with patients about the holidays and mental health a lot this time of year. Dr. Morgan, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
And Natasha T. Miller is a poet and the community engagement manager at the Michigan State University Museum. She was also the co-host of a podcast made by WDET and the MSU Museum. It's called The Science of Grief. Natasha Miller, thank you for joining us on the Metro, and welcome back to WDET.
Thank you for having me, and go green.
Go white.
I'm
yes.
outnumbered here.
I know. I got my Snuggie on, my Spartan Snuggie.
Love it.
Yes. Thank you. So we're going to jump to the phones first. Cindy, and we're going to start with you. You're an experienced mental health professional. How do the holidays show up in conversations with your patients this time of year?
Well, they show up primarily in the aspect of how much pressure people feel to be happy, to be joyful, to celebrate. And they may not be feeling those things, particularly if they've had a recent loss. Could be a loss of a loved one, but, could be loss of a job or loss of a dream, perhaps a miscarriage or a diagnosis of some disease they have to deal with. But there's a lot of pressure from family, from the media and songs and movies, commercials, sometimes in the Christmas card letters you get, which seem relentlessly cheerful. I don't know if I'm the only person who has bad things happen in my life, but no one talks about those in their Christmas letters. And so people feel a lot of guilt about not being able to perform correctly, or they feel a lot of tension about, oh my gosh, I have to go deal with my difficult family. What am I going to do? I don't want to, or I don't know how to deal with them when X, Y, or Z happens. This year in particular, people are talking about, what if politics comes up at a family gathering? What am I going to do? So there are a lot of different reasons that people might not be feeling so good during the holidays.
Dr. Cindy Morgan, there can be a lot of pressure, like you said, to be happy or to just act as if you are a part of all the festivities and you're going along with everything. I know personally for myself, the Hallmark movies and the Hallmark Channel, that's just one of the, I draw the line. That's one of the things that just really, it's one of the pet peeves for the holiday season for myself. But we talk about social pressures and trying to fit in. In what ways are you talking to folks about, not necessarily ignoring those social pressures, but getting over that and working for yourself during that holiday season, during the holiday seasons?
Well, I think you certainly to be able to identify what you're really feeling, I think is always important, because if you just ignore it, it will leak out in funny ways. Suddenly you'll blow up at someone in the middle of a conversation and then feel very bad about it. Yeah. So it's better to know, okay, I'm not feeling really great about this. I tell people it's really okay to know that. It's better to know it. Mm-hmm. I tell them to start by being kind to themselves and then to other people as best they can. It's sort of like in the airplane, they say, put your own oxygen mask on first. Like, first, be kind to yourself. Scale down the expectations for what the holidays will bring. Sometimes even scale down the traditions. If something is too painful, find other ways to do what matters most to you. You might reevaluate which things really mean something to you. Do those. Let go of some of the others. I also really encourage people to practice what they'll say when other people tell them certain predictable things. Oh, you must come to this gathering. Instead of saying, no, I must not, because you're in charge of me, which is what you might feel tempted to say, that you might say, I'm having a quieter Christmas this year. Or I'm going to celebrate the holidays in a different way.
That's more diplomatic.
And if you practice it, then you're more likely to say it. If you're caught off guard, you just kind of freeze, or you might say what's in your mind and might not be happy later that you said that.
Sure. Natasha, I want to bring you into the conversation. Dr. Morgan was just talking about acknowledging tough feelings. Tell us about the Science of Grief podcast and why you co-hosted it and the many tough feelings that you had to acknowledge in doing that.
Absolutely. Well, the Science of Grief podcast came from this idea that we have no one to talk to constantly and consistently about our grief. So before the podcast, I actually partnered with DIA, and we did a 14-hour program called The Science of Grief, where people could come in the middle of the night from 7 p.m. until 9 a.m. and just in 15-minute increments talk about somebody that they had lost. That idea just came from 3 a.m., me laying in the bed, because I lost my brother December 28th, 10 years ago. And it was one of the hardest things that I had to deal with, but I felt like my family and my friends were exhausted with me telling the same stories about the same person all the time. So, at that time I was thinking, where does the grief go now? Who can I talk to? Who still acknowledges that I'm in pain? Who still cares about this death, this loss that I've experienced? And then I thought about how many other people didn't have space to talk about the people that they lost. It doesn't matter if it was 10 days ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. These people were important to us. So I just felt like so many of us had that grief just still kind of bottled up and just felt like we exhausted all possibilities. So from me doing the show with the DIA, which was a 24-hour event when I pitched it to the DIA, and they were like, okay, it's not this much grief in the world, and they cut it down to 14 hours, which was still madness, and partnered with the MSU Museum where I work, and then we, pitched the idea to WDET, because one thing that I realized is that the grief in young adults had went unacknowledged. At the Science of Grief with the DIA, there was a lot of, elders and older folks that showed up. And then I just thought about, there's so much grief that kids deal with, that young adults deal with. So we decided to create space for them and to hear their stories about the losses that they've experienced. And that's how we got to the podcast with WDT.
I'm wondering how that podcast has perhaps changed the way that you approach the holidays and that you confront your own grief when it comes to the loss of your brother, given it was so close to Christmas, December 28th, 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I think that I was very fortunate to have Bonnie join me, Bonnie Wheeler, who was an MSU clinical therapist graduate. But just it was me being able to hear the professional side of how to deal with my own grief, because for almost a decade, I just kind of navigated grief like however it showed up. I just dealt with it in the moment. I think that me kind of listening to this professional sit on the other end of, the phone and give me tips and advice on like how to actually prepare for the holidays. I think that really kind of changed things for me, because I used to always sit in sadness with the holidays, but now it's more of a celebration of the life of my brother. And I know that kind of sounds cliche to a lot of people, but, I had to just realize and accept that this person is no longer here, but also accept that this person was here before. My birthday is January 3rd. My brother was cremated on my birthday. His funeral was the day after my birthday. His birthday is January 14th. So I used to just kind of take the time between like December 28th and January 14th and just be sad, just sit in sadness and try to memorialize him the same way every year, balloon release, drinking, all the things that inherently just kind of got stale, kind of got old, and I felt like I just was kind of just sitting in the same sort of sadness. So I think that I just kind of reversed the way that I thought about it, and now it really is he was here, all the things that he, enjoyed that I try to enjoy myself, and just remember him in good ways. And he's not the only family member that I've lost, because a couple of years ago, another one of my brothers passed away in December. Same thing, aunts, et cetera, et cetera. But I think me just kind of turning to family, staying in therapy, and really thinking about, all the good times that I had with these family members is much better.
But it takes, in other words, it takes work, though. It takes a lot of work and practicing, a lot of bringing in a lot of different tools.
Well, it takes therapy for sure. So,
exactly. And time is often not enough, you know? Sometimes you got to do the work combined with the time passage.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. Natasha, just staying with you for one more round here before we bring Dr. Morgan back into the conversation. You talked a little bit about, getting on your friend's nerve or your family's nerve when you're constantly talking about this, and you're in this state, so you can't see anything outside of that state. You're in this you're stuck in this position, and so if you can expand on feeling like a burden to your family and your friends and the people around you when you have this pain that you want to get out and you want to release, but you know that you can't keep putting it on their shoulders.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I had to realize is I was calling it a burden, right? But my family and friends were not calling it a burden.
Yeah.
So I just expected that that's how they felt. I was trying to feel for them. But when I came to terms with things and was able to communicate that to them, a lot of them were like, I don't feel that way. You can call me anytime. You could talk about the same thing anytime. And I wrote a book, Butcher, and I talk about in the book in one of the poems about how like my friend would come over and sit on the floor with me and listen to the same stories about the same person like anytime that I called. So I think you actually asking people how they feel versus projecting onto them, their feelings, and you have no idea that they are open, they are willing, they're there for you. And I have friends that lost people, and their moms, their dads, whatever, and they talk to me about it all the time, and I'm never exhausted by it. So the point that I was making myself like in exhaustion, and they didn't feel that way at all, kind of set with me. And now it's just ask people how they feel. Ask people, are they willing to listen to your stories? But also there's other resources and other people that you can talk to and call outside of just like your inner circle.
That bars, just straight bar. Thank you so much for that, because it just helped me a lot personally. Just think about the way that I interact with folks in general. So thank you so much for saying it in that way and putting it out there like that. Dr. Morgan, bringing you back into the conversation. Talking about young people and their mental health and oftentimes how it's just completely overlooked. Is holiday stress and anxiety more of an adult thing, or what can we expect, especially when we talk about people who are that 25 and under age group who are really going through stuff?
Well, grief doesn't have any age limit. It can happen to very young children and happen to those of us who are looking toward the end of life. But I think in so many ways, it feels like, grief and loss is about as you're older and you lose people. But people lose people at very young ages. I had a sister who passed away at 44. She left behind an 11-year-old son, and his dad had died 8 years earlier. So my nephew was an orphan at age 11. We don't think those things happen in this culture, but of course they still happen. You know, people die of various things. And it's important to have people who are not frightened to talk about younger folks with their feelings, or they don't try to plaster over and make it's going to be okay, because that leaves the child or the young person alone to deal with that feeling. And as Natasha was saying, it's hard to feel like you're all alone in there and you're the only one feeling this. Everyone else is fine and they want you to be fine. What I try to tell folks of any age that I deal with is that it's important to know you are not the only one who is suffering, that your heart is broken, but that may open you to know that you're part of the fellowship of people who are suffering right now. All across the world, there are people who are suffering. You're not alone.
Doctor,
and it's okay to reach out to trusted people, and those are the ones who can listen to you. And if you need to tell the same story 20 times, they can hear it and they don't mind.
Dr. Morgan, the fellowship of suffering, I want to stay on that notion for a moment because that really does bring some comfort. I think when you're in therapy and you're talking about a situation that you're struggling with, and to have a therapist say to you, you are not alone. You are a part of a much broader segment of the population who is dealing with that too. So just if you could expand a little bit on the notion of the fellowship of suffering.
Yeah, I think, I like what the Buddhists say. They say that the first great truth about life is that life is suffering. It's not optional and it's not your fault. It's just what's given. And so being able to feel like it's not my fault I'm going through this, or that I feel this way, that can be very helpful. And not feeling like you're odd or weird because you're suffering. I think, too, our modern culture, particularly in America, we tend to try to ignore it a bit. The Victorians, for example, you would wear black for an entire year after an important loss, which just announced to people without ever saying it, here's someone who's had a big loss. Please be gentle with them. And that was helpful. I've had many clients who will get a black bracelet or a black tie or something, and they wear it every day for a year to remind themselves, be gentle with yourself. You're going through something hard. You're not the only one. When everyone used to wear black, if they were suffering a loss, you could see who else was in certain parts of that club. But the truth is we're all in that club at one time or another. For me, it's part of why I really like sad Christmas music, because it's like, other people have felt these same things and they've put them into beautiful, beautiful expressions of it.
Yes. Dr. Morgan, thank you for articulating a feeling that I've always had but never really explored or thought about why that was so, that when I hear some of that more melancholy or sorrowful Christmas music, it does give me like some amount of hope, some amount of, comfort. Natasha, I wonder if you found that in revealing your grief to other people that it brought you closer to those that you talked about it with.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's a movie that Philip Seymour Hoffman was in with Meryl Streep called Doubt. And I think in like the opening monologue, he talks about how when you internalize all of these things and don't share with people what you're going through, you feel like you're on one side of the window and the whole world is on the other side of the window. For so long, not talking about the actual grief that I was experiencing, I felt like it was just me in it by myself. Once I started to tell other people, it started to encourage them to tell other people how they were feeling and talk to me. So just finding that community made me feel, less alone, more vulnerable, allowed me to lean more into the grief, more into the sadness, but leaning into it allowed me to actually acknowledge it and do something about it. But I think that there is no better thing to find in like community, a community of sadness, a community of happiness, a community of grievers, whatever that is. I think that's very important. But I felt much better once I started to actually say, this is how I feel, and allowed other people to do the same thing to me.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET. We're speaking with Dr. Cindy Morgan, a clinical psychologist who specializes in grief, loss, and anxiety, and Natasha T. Miller. And we want to hear from you. What are your holiday traditions, or how do you hold memories of loved ones you've lost during the holiday season? And how are you feeling this particular holiday season? We want to know. 313-577-1019. We will continue this conversation with Natasha and Dr. Morgan in a moment. Welcome back to The Metro on WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We've been taking your calls and chatting about the holidays and holiday emotions. So we're wondering, how are you feeling today thinking about the holiday season? Are you feeling excited, anxious, overwhelmed? How do you take care of yourself during the holiday season? Call and let us know, 313-577-1019. We've got two guests joining us to talk about mental health during the holidays.
Indeed, we do. Dr. Cindy Morgan is on the line. She's a mental health professional, and she speaks with patients about the holidays and mental health a lot this time of year. Cindy Morgan, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
So glad to be here and talk about this.
Of course. And Natasha T. Miller is a poet and the community engagement manager at the Michigan State University Museum. She was also the co-host of a podcast made by WDET and the MSU Museum, The Science of Grief. Natasha, thanks for being back at WDET.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we were just talking about confronting grief, maybe overcoming is too strong of a word, sitting with grief, let's say, and how to do that, especially during the holidays. Now, Dr. Morgan, let's talk a little bit about stress and anxiety. What are some strategies for people to manage those feelings during the holidays?
Well, I think a really important and simple one, so simple it sounds stupid whenever I tell people, but it's to breathe. Because for most of us, when we get stressed, we start to tense up in our body. We start to breathe more from our chest, so higher in our lungs, which actually sends the body into preparing for fight or flight. Mm-hmm. If you take just a little time, 3 to 5 breaths that you do low and slow, try to do what we call belly breathing instead of chest breathing, and kind of just slow everything down, ground yourself a little bit in the moment, and then you can meet whatever there is in the moment. So that's kind of really useful advice about any kind of stressor. But I think with holidays, there are some stressors people can anticipate. And if you can anticipate, you can make a plan for how you'll deal with it. So, for example, if you have to go to a difficult family gathering or a work party that you're not looking forward to, go with a strategy to help you get through it. I often say find an ally, somebody who will be there that you can kind of talk with or sit next to, or you might have little signals to each other when somebody's getting out of line. You can kind of roll your eyes at each other. I also say if you're going to go to the family and they're hard, play family bingo with your ally. So you make a bingo card, the things that you can predict that someone will do or say, and you put them on your bingo card. And whoever gets bingo first, the other one has to buy them a coffee. So a little game that you can play to deal with families.
Sure, add some levity.
Add some levity. Laughter is really a huge antidote to the kind of stress. But the other thing I tell people is scale back on things. It's all right to say no. In fact, it's really important at the holidays to figure out how much you can put up with in terms of activities and know when you're full and you need time to recharge.
Right. Understanding your own capacity and not pushing yourself past that. Natasha, I wonder how stress and anxiety, how it has changed for you over the years when it comes to, you've confronted grief and and you've had to really sit with grief and loss. Does stress and anxiety over the holidays look different for you than it once did?
Oh, yeah, it looks much different. When I talk about the loss of my brother, like every December 28th, my family would want to get together, do a balloon release, almost like, kind of party like, but also be sad at the same time. About 3 years ago, I kind of stopped participating in it. It was like, no, I don't want to do this. I can just stay home. I could watch a movie. I could listen to some of his favorite songs. I can cook myself dinner. I could do whatever it is, but I'm not participating in the sadness because I don't feel sad this year. So I think just learning to just say no to things. On Thanksgiving, my family had a big thing. Hopefully they're not listening. I didn't go because I don't like to play potluck roulette, as I tell my friends. But I just had my mom over at the house, my best friend, partner, a couple other people, and just kind of relaxed and chilled out. So during the holidays, I feel a lot less stressed because I have a lot bigger no in me than I had years ago. And I also just don't try to abandon my routines during the holiday season. So if I like to go to the schwitz and steam, go to the sauna, meditate a little bit, I think just staying on routine and not abandon it because it's the holidays kind of keeps me on track and relieves a lot of that stress.
Just thinking about or hearing you talk about not going to Thanksgiving, there are times, and I know folks may be listening to me as well, there are times where I'm just like, I don't know. But you make it anyway. And I love to hear that you were one of those people that said it's okay to say no. And it's okay to just say no. And I love that so much. Natasha, you're a poet. So, I think about how you use poetry to deal with stressors during the holidays. How do you use it as a creative outlet to kind of get some of that out?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that poetry is the thing that saved my life, maybe. I have no idea. I just randomly wrote a poem one day and found out that people enjoyed listening to me and just kind of rolled the things until the wheels fell off, and they have not fallen off yet.
Wow.
Thankfully.
They're on.
Right. But I think growing up, I was a quiet child, and my best friend mom, we was discussing that last night, how growing up she thought that I was a bad influence on my best friend. Then she realized my best friend was the actual bad influence, but she talked about how she would just come into this back room and I would just be writing poems just by myself in the room. But I think because I felt like I didn't have a voice growing up, and not that it was, stifled by my family or anything like that. I just was kind of shy, and I like to keep everything in. I'm not an overly emotional person, but I think through poetry, I was able to communicate exactly what it was that I was feeling, and a lot of the traumas that I experienced, for some reason, it felt better to write it and tell 100 or 1,000 people than it did to talk to just one person about it, one-on-one. So, poetry, it saved me.
Natasha T. Miller is a poet and the community engagement manager at the MSU Museum. She was also the co-host of a podcast made by WDET and the MSU Museum. It's called The Science of Grief, and Dr. Cindy Morgan is a mental health professional. She speaks with patients about the holidays and mental health. Thank you both, Dr. Morgan and Natasha T. Miller, for joining us.
Thank you.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening.